What's going on, everybody? My name is Greg Peters. You guys are watching the Car Passion channel, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of wiring work. I've got some sub harnesses that came out of my car that I need to pretty much hack up, make beautiful, and even one, completely start from scratch again, because I want my wiring harness to look good and be functional. I'm not necessarily going to do a full tuck on my car, but these are some skills that you could use if you're going to do a wire tuck. And also, you could use these kind of skills on any sort of car. If you're gonna do a wire tuck on your 91 V6 Camaro, you could use the skills that I'm gonna show you in this video. So let's go over to the workbench. I'm gonna show you what I'm working with, show you what my end goals are, and we'll get started. I have a couple of sub harnesses here. Now, sub harness is basically just a miniature wiring harness that plugs into your car's main wiring harness that serves a specific purpose. This one here is an aftermarket harness that I added for the LS2 ignition coils. I'm gonna put this one aside for now because I have kind of a different task I need to do on this later. I want to get the more difficult one done first. This one is my OEM 1.6 liter fuel injector sub harness. I'm going to be modifying this harness pretty heavily so I can still use it. Number one, to make it look better, but number two, because I need to add a couple of features to it. You'll notice I did already cut the injector connectors off quite a while ago when I stole the injectors for Broken Boosted, but that's okay because I need to add this different style of injector connector for the Injector Dynamics fuel injectors that I have in the car now. I also need to add a new connector for the ECU coolant temperature sensor because mine melted off when I had the small fire in the engine bay. I need to add power and signal for the VVT solenoid to this harness because that solenoid sits right above it, so the cleanest way to do it is to run it through here. And the last thing is I'm going to convert the car over to sequential ignition because the 1.6 liter uses what's called batch fire. Now that means that injector 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 are on the same signal. So 1 and 3 always fire at once and 2 and 4 always fire at the same time. It's kind of an old school injector firing system, and when you go to sequential, each of the 4 injectors have their own signal. They fire individually, and it's just better for drivability, smoother idle, tuning, power, all that stuff. So the VVT engine actually came with sequential injection. That's why I need to convert this harness so I can power that, and of course the Megasquirt can do that easily. Now, if you are putting an NB engine into your 1.8 liter NA, you don't really have to worry about adding those signals because your wiring harness already has them. This is a 1.8 liter injector sub harness. You can see you've got 8 ports here. 4 of those are for the injectors. But on the 1.6, you've only got 6 ports, 2 of which are the injectors. I know this probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but I'm gonna try to keep this video more specific to just wiring harness modification, and then I'll get into more of the detailed stuff as far as what color wire needs to go where and what needs power and what doesn't, etc. in the next video. Now, this harness is gonna undergo so many changes. I'm gonna start by just straight up hacking this off and doing all new lengths for everything and then rewrapping it the way that I want it to sit in the engine bay. Before I do that, it's important to notice that on factory wiring harnesses, everything is marked by colored wires. You can see that we've got a pure yellow wire here, a yellow wire with a black stripe. Each one has a specific purpose, and you need to match those up later. So tucking a wiring harness really is just a matter of cutting the stock harness and making some things longer, some things shorter, but you have to make sure that your colored wires match up. That kind of information can be found like in your owner's manuals. I looked all this stuff up prior, so I've got a notepad with what all the colors are in this sub harness, what each wire does right now, what it's gonna do in the future. I'm making a couple changes, and then of course what I'm adding to the harness. Once we do it, there's no going back. Oh boy. It's always a big step there to just hack a harness in half like that. Really, the main reason I'm doing that is just so I can keep utilizing this plug. It kind of keeps it sort of factory looking, and I can always unplug the sub harness later if I want to. So I've got my 4 injectors right here. I've got my VVT solenoid, which I'm going to be integrating as well. And over on the other side of the head, back there on the coolant reroute, I've got my ECU temperature sensor and my gauge cluster temperature sensor. Then you also have to realize where your plug is going to be. That is the 6-pin plug that I'm going to be tapping into. I kind of found somewhat of a nice place to put it. I relocated this strap up to here. I was right down there. So this kind of puts everything up high. I'm just gonna run these harnesses along the firewall back here. They'll run to the injectors and then up to the VVT solenoid and also around the back of the head to those sensors. I know that's not like the most beautiful place to put it, but I don't want to do a crazy full tuck on this thing to where it makes it hard to work on. I want this thing to be as easy to work on as possible, pretty much everything exposed, and I think that'll give me clean enough wire routing. My strategy here is to build all the connectors, attach excessively long wire leads to every connector. Like, I know it's gonna be way too long. So I can get all these sensors together and bunch up the wires, and then I'll be sizing and measuring everything up while it's actually on the car, and that's what's gonna allow me to get the perfect lengths for everything. To build your connectors, you'll take a length of wire here, and take the little waterproof rubber insulator and slide that on. Strip off about 4 millimeters or so. There's the actual connector itself. Now this is a dual crimp type. For those wondering, anything that comes like this, that I will be crimping and soldering the rest. I think crimping and soldering can both be done properly and effectively. So I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, you've gotta use crimp connectors, soldering just gets weak and breaks, but I've been soldering connections in cars for about, probably 10 years now, maybe even longer than that. And I've never had one fail. So don't tell me that soldering is not good. You bunch of keyboard warriors, go crimp something. Anyways, with the dual connector, you've got a set of flaps right here. That's gonna crimp onto the wire itself. And you got a second set of flaps right there. That's gonna crimp onto the insulation, which will hold the wire in place. So you'll slide your wire in just like that to let the first set of clamps grab onto the exposed strands. You do want to use actual crimpers for this job. You don't want to try to be ghetto and use pliers. You can test it by, you should be able to pull in that connector real hard and it won't slip off. And I don't even have the secondary one pinned down yet. So for the second one, I just go in one shot with the M jaws. You get it crimped down and then that thing's not going anywhere. Now you just feed that in there. Feel kind of a little click and it won't come back out. Slide your insulation in. You can use a little flathead. You want to make sure every ridge is all the way in. Looking kind of like that when you're done. And then once you do the other side, this connector in particular, it's got like a secondary little lock for the pins. You just push that down. When you're done, you'll have one that looks like this. It's got 2 wires. They're nice and long, way too long in fact. I'll be cutting those later once I finish all of my connectors. I'll check back in then. One thing you really gotta pay attention to is if you look inside the injector plug, there's a little plus sign. The pin on the left is the power side. So that's the side that's gonna get the 12-volt power. The pin on the right is going to get the injector signal or the switched ground. All right, I've got all my plugs built now. They're also labeled as far as which one each one goes to. And then I've got 3 excessively long ones that are going to the ECU. Injector 3 signal, injector 4 signal, and VVT signal. Now 5 of these wires are actually all gonna combine in the harness before they even get to my plug here. There are 5 power wires. All of them can go to the same 12-volt source, which is this red and white wire. And then the rest are signals, so they'll go to their appropriate places. I've also designated each one of the injector plugs to a certain number. So because I'm using all wiring of the same color, which isn't exactly the best idea, but as long as you keep things straight in the beginning, you'll be okay. When I unplug these, I want to make sure I know which injector they go back onto. So I've got a number 1 there, and then on the back end, we got signal 1 and 12 volts. So I know which wire is which. Do all the 12-volt sources first. So I'll take the 12-volt from the VVT solenoid, and that's going to be one continuous wire all the way over to the plug. And then I'll tap into it 4 times, 1 for each injector, and then that one wire will feed all 5 things their 12-volt source. Part of this step is also realizing what shape you want the harness to have and where exactly you want it to go. I pretty much want it to come right off the injectors, have a little bit of room to play with so it's easy to unplug the injectors. So I'm gonna go off the injectors probably about that far. And now I'll just mark in 4 spots on that VVT power where I'm going to tap in for the injectors. So I've got the 4 places that I'll be tapping into this 12-volt source. This part is kind of tricky. There's probably a better way to do it, but I've always done it this way. You just got to be extremely careful. I'm just going to take a razor and slowly work my way around the insulation to strip a small area, being very careful not to cut any of the strands. That's the result you want right there, just the insulation stripped off and the inner wire exposed. Now I'll take all of the 12-volt sources for the injector connectors, and I'm going to cut them all at exactly the same length, roughly about 2 inches. Now I'll strip them all, and I want to strip these pretty long because I'm actually going to tie them in to the main 12-volt source to get an extra strong solder connection. Now I come down 12-volt source for the VVT solenoid, and there's a little exposed wire which I'm going to wrap my injector 12-volt around, and I'm going to solder it right there. After you've got a rock solid solder connection, just take your shrink wrap and I'm going to slide it up and just do that 4 more times. Alright, now we're getting somewhere. So the powers are all tied in, and you're left with the 4 signals and then the signal for the VVT solenoids. You're just gonna get tied in just like this as we go along here. And to hold everything in place, I'm just gonna use a little piece of electrical tape. That's looking a lot better, a lot cleaner. I've also routed in the wires from the 2 coolant temperature sensors on the back of the head, and then run it right over to where the harness is actually going to plug in to my 6-pin plug. I've also got the 3 real long ones that are going to go down to the ECU. I'm just going to roll those up and tape them for now, and I'll worry about running those when I actually install the ECU. I just wanted to get the actual engine bay harnesses put together. So I've plugged in the plug with all the loose ends here, and I'm going to solder each wire 1 by 1 in the engine bay so I can leave my labels on, double check which connections I'm making, and then I'll take the whole harness back out and wrap it up. I know it looks a little scary once you get to this point, but hopefully me showing all the steps leading up to this will help you understand it a little bit better. So at this point, I'm just going to start going 1 by 1 and making my connections into the car's harness.
Chuki beat.
This stuff comes in all different sizes. You can pick it up at auto parts store or even like Fry's. It's just a split plastic wrap, just like the factory harness used. There's my custom harness for running a VVT engine in a 1.6 liter chassis with injector dynamics injectors. And like I said, all this stuff I'm gonna end up wrapping later because I gotta add some more wiring to it, but this front half here is done. So the LS2 coil harness, this is actually from a GM pickup truck, and the shape of the harness is meant to work with that truck. not a Miata. So before, I had it just draped over the top of my intake manifold. It looked super ghetto, so I want to run it a lot cleaner now. So what I'm going to do is just unwrap this harness and then reshape it and try to wrap it up again, and I won't have to bother with cutting and soldering a bunch of things. I just want it to be a better shape so it fits in my engine bay. It's not very beautiful under here, and it's not going to be perfect if I just like rewrap it, so I'm probably going to modify this a little bit the same way I did with the other one so it comes out clean. Yeah, I ended up just redoing the entire thing. I mean, it's so much cleaner. It's not obviously wrapped yet, but I readjusted all the lengths. I took off all the extra out of the harness, and I didn't do anything complicated. It's just matching up colors, reconnecting wires, make sure every single one of your solder joints is strong as you do it, and it's pretty easy. All right, guys, so that's kind of my part one to the wiring of the engine and harness modification stuff. Hopefully you learned something. I have a second video that will be coming out covering more of the specific details on how to wire up your 1.6 chassis to a VVT engine, as well as how to wire up LS2 coils. It's really simple. You guys are gonna be like, we waited a year for this. Anyways, if you liked it, don't forget to throw a thumbs up on it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.
Back from the dead.